Go back, yep. Okay, hello everybody. My name is Truman Anarella. I am presenting on the evolution of invasive species detection using remote sensing. A lot of these sessions are building on each other, so I'm excited to close this out here with one more layer to it. I'm here representing a few different organizations, those being the NASA Develop program, but also the Natural Resource Ecology Laboratory out of Colorado State University. So some of the early work, I'm going to try to do my presentation in a sort of a timeline, a story, if you will. Some of the early work, so the Natural Resource Ecology Laboratory, I'll be saying NREL throughout the presentation. So NREL did a landscape scale assessment of Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. They collected data from 1999 to 2004. A lot of these data were, I think it was like 400 plots looking at all sorts of things like species richness, soil type, things like that. And this was a good first effort to do just a landscape scale assessment of the region. And with a lot of that data, we started doing some modeling with some tamarisk. So this photo on the left here is my science advisor, Paul Evangelista, who actually did his PhD work down here in the monument. So we started off with just taking this data, this tamarisk data, and creating some detection models with it, just using variables like distance to stream, topographic variables like elevation, slope, aspect, and they found that tamarisk really thrive, as you'd expect. Tamarisk invasive species would thrive nearby riparian areas. In this model, it also showed that there are areas adjacent to current tamarisk invasion that are also susceptible to further invasion as well. Moving along here, this is a big step in analysis. So this is using remote sensing for invasive species detection. So instead of just using these on-the-ground observations like the field data and just topographic variables, we're now looking at these ecosystems from a satellite's perspective. So these are images from the Landsat series of satellites, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But this study did a comparison of satellite images from 2006 and then again in 2016. So each one of these is a single Landsat scene or just an image from the satellite. And they used this satellite imagery and used some training data that they collected. This is actually not in Grand Staircase, this is in the Colorado River Basin. But they used some training data that they collected to train the model based on those same topographic variables, but also some remote sensing variables as well from the satellite. And we found that the model did rely heavily on a lot of that training data. Something pretty encouraging is that from 2006 to 2016, there were a few areas that were treated for tamarisk, and the model detected that tamarisk cover decreased in those areas, which is a good sign. So that kind of sets the stage for some of the early work detecting invasive species. But now into the meat and potatoes of my story. So the rest of this presentation, I'll be talking about the NASA Develop program and a project that I did with the program. Basically about NASA Develop. It's one of NASA's basically an internship program. We do 10-week feasibility studies investigating the use of NASA data for environmental decision making. We have all different application areas, from looking at agriculture. We do a lot of agricultural projects, but the main project I'm going to be talking about is an ecological conservation project that I was a part of back in 2023. Yeah, so diving into those slides, so a background, we're going to start with our study area, and that is actually the Paria River, which is the other main river in the monument. It has its headwaters within the Dixie National Forest and Bryce Canyon National Park. It's a major tributary of the Colorado River. It provides a lot of key sediments to the Colorado River. You can see it mixing with the river here in this picture. And it passes directly through the western portion of the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. We found a few papers talking about different species within the monument, and we found that there's over like 900 different species of vegetation, but some of the ones we wanted to target were some invasive species such as tamarisk and Russian olive, which you all just learned about. A little background about tamarisk. Here's its scientific name. It's originally from Eurasia, but it was brought to the United States for erosion control. And it kind of spread like wildfire in the early 1900s, and now it's very common in a lot of Western riparian areas. It's a big problem. It increases the soil salinity. It's also salt eater, so it secretes salt, and it also takes up a lot of the water resources as well, decreasing the water table. And one of the studies that we found said it was the second most common woody riparian species in the Western United States, which is a pretty staggering number. So some of the community concerns we had for this project, obviously starting off with some invasive species, such as the Russian olive and tamarisk. They compete for a lot of limited resources. In the desert, life thrives in these riparian areas, so if the riparian ecosystems are being dominated by invasive species, then the native species struggle to compete for those resources. And that also leads to habitat degradation and also just management issues with water. Yeah, there's my last bullet, complications with water management. So here's our study area visualized. So here we are in the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. A lot of the talks so far have been focused on the Escalante River, but for our study, we were more focused on the Paria River watershed. When we had our first initial partner meetings with the Grand Staircase Escalante partners, they mentioned that there have been some pretty large-scale efforts for invasive species removal along the Escalante River, but not a lot of similar efforts along the Paria River. So that was one of the main goals of this project, was to explore new methods for invasive species detection along the Paria River, which is the other main tributary within the monument. Speaking of which, our NASA Develop project, we partnered with Kevin and the Grand Staircase Escalante partners. They were looking to identify areas for treatment and surveying. Maybe our results would help support some of their future grant fundings, and then also just coordinate water resources as well. So some of our objectives for the project, first off, we wanted to create a time series phenology analysis of some of the invasive species in the monument, and then compare those to some native species as well to see if we could find any differences in phenology. And then from that, we can identify some key predictor variables and put those into a spatial occurrence models for Russian olive and tamarisk. So again, using the phenology variables from the satellite data, and then putting that into the models to try and detect the invasive plant species. So a lot of this, it started off with some field data collection. So this was back in 2023, actually. So Grand Staircase Escalante partners did a great job doing some field data collection in the upper, middle, and lower reaches of the Paria River. So we had volunteers go out and collect plots that were a minimum of 10 meters in diameter, and then just recording the main species cover of each plot. So what that looks like is, I don't know if there's a good way to visualize that, but 10 meters, and then you'll say, oh, this has 60% tamarisk cover, 40% bare ground or sand, something like that. And this data was really helpful in training some of our models. Here is just what that looks like on a map. So we had volunteers just combing the different reaches of the watershed, and then we plotted those points on a map, and then we color-coded them here. So you can see that there's different types of species. So the main target ones we wanted the most data for were the invasive species, so tamarisk and Russian olive, but also we wanted a good amount of native species present points as well, so willows and cottonwoods. Oh, too far. And then just one more quick plot showing the distribution of that data. So a lot of just bare ground in here. but also it just shows what kind of data we were working with for some of our models in the invasive species detection points. One thing I will point out here is the very few points of Russian olive that we got. And so because of this, we didn't have a lot of high presence points for Russian olive, and that made our Russian olive model perform quite poorly, which is why most of this presentation is tailored towards tamarisk, but we did investigate Russian olive detection as well. So diving into more remote sensing, so we use variables from NASA satellites. These are the Landsat satellites. The Landsat 8 and 9, OLI stands for Operational Land Imager, and then as well the Shuttle Radar Topography Mission. So I'll try to explain this in pretty simple terms, but these satellites, they're looking down at the Earth, and they are looking at things, they're looking at the surface with things called bands. And if you think of how we see things through our eyes, we see regular colors, but there's a lot of things that a satellite will pick up that our eyes can't see. And so, for example, different kinds of radiation that a plant gives off can indicate a plant's healthiness. So we use a lot of those remote sensing variables to train some of our models. And then this shuttle radar topography mission, that's mostly just used for topographic variables, so elevation, slope, aspect. Here's kind of what that looks like visualized. So we took some satellite images from the Landsat 8 and 9 satellite. We clipped them to our study area, and then also we have to mask out clouds because it's a satellite. Clouds can interfere. So we clipped and masked everything, and then we calculated tassel cap indice. So basically what that is a combination of all of those different spectral signatures that the satellite is picking up, all combined into one. And this one in particular is tassel cap wetness. So it just shows the general amount of moisture that a plant might have. And the Paria River is that, I should use my laser pointer. It's this polygon we have here. So what you can take away from this map is we see a lot of pretty colors, yay. But more importantly, it just gives us an idea of like what it looks like on a landscape, but also if you were to zoom in on the river, you can see like there is a good amount of purple just along the river. So that indicates like the vegetation close by the river has a good amount of moisture to it, which makes sense. So here's what that data analysis looks like. So our first objective, as a reminder, was to do a phenological time series for the target species. So there's a lot going on in this chart, but basically it's color coded by species. So each line is a different species. And we were trying to pick out dates where the invasive species were vastly different than the native species. And you can see how that might be quite difficult with a very busy chart like this. So if you think about looking at plants from a satellite's perspective, you might think that it would be very difficult to distinguish between a willow and then also a tamarisk species because they have very similar, they're both like woody, riparian vegetation. It might be hard for a satellite to pick up on a difference like that, which is why we think this time series graph was only moderately successful. But we did take away a few things from this, most importantly, like key dates that we used for variables for our model. Okay, I have to keep moving, I'm sorry. So for our tamarisk detection model, we use a lot of different predictor variables. A lot of them I just mentioned, like the remote sensing indices, and then narrowed that down to a few other ones like canopy height and topography. And for these models, we modeled against Russian olive cover and tamarisk cover as our response variables. So here's the moment you've all been waiting for. This is our detection model throughout the Paria River watershed with a combination of all of those variables. And we can see that it does predict tamarack occurrence. It's kind of, I don't want it to be doom and gloom, but the model's like, oh, there's tamarack, it could be everywhere. It's not actually everywhere. This is just where it could be based on a lot of those variables. I also want to point out that our model performance, it was really good. That's in this bottom box right here. It was really good at identifying the absence points, but less good at identifying the presence points. So there's an old saying, all models are wrong, some are useful. So this model is wrong, but it could be helpful in seeing like, oh, this particular reach of the watershed, it has a lot of potential tamarack presence points, so maybe this could be a first area to survey or for our removal efforts. And then closing out here, I just want to talk about some future work we could do with this, and this is something we could do with the phenological approach. So I had that graph showing just what the plant species looks like over the growing season, but if we could fine tune that better, maybe we could implement that into our models. One way we could think about doing that is by looking for peak green updates. So tamarack, for example, it has this like pink hue to it when it's in full green. And so if we could find a satellite image that was closest to that date, then maybe it would be easier to distinguish this kind of green color from just the brownish color of a willow. And so Kevin has been putting out some game cameras on a few tamarack plants for the past 2 years. So we have 2 years of data to work with. So the idea here is we would find a date of peak greenness from these game cameras and then try to align that with a satellite image from that close date. And that would help us detect the tamarack a little better. Just some quick takeaways. Like I keep saying, the spectral signatures between the invasive species, but also the native species could make this approach pretty challenging. It's hard to distinguish those from a satellite's perspective. But there was some promise in using the Landsat data in a combination of LiDAR data, which we use to look at canopy cover of the invasive species. Our model found that it predicted with 73% accuracy. A lot of that is inflated by the predicting the absence points really well. But it does, like I said, it does predict tamarack presence throughout the entire watershed. And then last point here is that the tamarack and Russian olive, they have unique green up phenology, so that might make them easier to detect if we had more precise images and satellite images from those peak green updates. With that, I just want to do a few quick thank yous to science advisors at the Natural Resource Ecology Lab, my team at NASA Develop, and then finally, Kevin with Grand Staircase's Quante Partners from helping out with field data collection to being our partner on this project, and then also putting together the symposium. I think that's all I have.